Welcome back to a new episode of Girls Talk Cyber. This one is a bit of a storytelling one, and we start with the assumption that the cyber threat is always on the outside of your organization, right? Well, I'm afraid not, because it seems to be the tale as old as time. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, which in the case of this story is to say, get a job at your enemy's company and use that job to spy on them.
Yeah, and look, it seems a little bit far-fetched, but our cybersecurity tales are hopefully never dull, and today is no different. We are looking to present you with a case of an insider cybersecurity threat. So this is a little bit scandalous, it's pretty absurd, and it does end in quite an exciting, I guess, trap or gotcha moment right at the end.
And it's the exact kind of story that you might not hear about if you're outside of the cybersecurity industry. But trust us, it is an exceptional one and worth the listen. And when Jules says absurd, she means it. A phone may or may not be flushed down the toilet in this tale, but we'll get to that in due time. Jules, what is the story we are covering today?
So today we are talking about a lawsuit called Rippling versus Deel. Deel, D-E-E-L, not other Deel. These are both names of really big companies. And so essentially what this lawsuit does, it claims that one company hired a spy to work at the other company to essentially harvest secrets and send them back to the big dogs for financial and reputational gain.
Oof, what an explosive claim indeed. But who are these companies? Why did they get a spy involved? And how did they get caught? All answers we'll get to soon, so lean in, Cyber Queens. This is an interesting one.
All right. So first things first, we need to introduce the two parties that are involved in this story. So let's take it back and introduce them. As we mentioned, there is Company A, or Rippling, and in this story, they are kind of the victim, I suppose, and that's probably how we'll refer to them a couple of times throughout this. And then Company B, which is Deel. And in this case, they are alleged the bad guys in the lawsuit, which is why we will also refer to them as Dodgy Deel for, to help keep things on track. It's a bit of a complex story. And so Em and I have put in some simplification techniques.
Trust us, you'll need it. There's lots of twists and turns. So the first company, Rippling, was founded in 2016. And as per a San Francisco Standard article, most recently was valued at $13.5 billion. And Dodgy Deel, which was founded 3 years later in 2019, is valued at also $12 billion. So lots of money at stake here between our good friends Rippling and Deel.
That is some seriously big bucks. So both are making like billions of dollars a year. Producing what, might you ask? It might be something really cool, a really cool product, maybe some like amazing thing that's revolutionary. Not quite. It's actually just workplace management software. And so what we're talking about when we say HR and workplace management software, we're talking about like the applications that keep your payroll up and running. It's leave trackers, it's compliance reports, is probably all the behind the scenes stuff that we don't even think about when we look at really big businesses. So a little bit lackluster, but either way, billions of dollars are being transacted by these companies every single year. So there is a lot at stake in this story.
These two companies sell the same product, but they also are only 10 minutes apart in the Silicon Valley. And it's alleged that the rivalry between these $2 billion companies is incredibly hostile.
Yeah, so Deel was actually using Rippling as an HR software right up until just recently in 2023, which is pretty weird. And they actually only stopped because Rippling more or less said, hey, given the fact that you make your own HR software, we don't think you should use ours anymore because we're concerned that your access and use of our systems will inform your own efforts in that regard, and would prefer if, we each compete on the merits of our own innovation, which makes complete sense, right? Like, why would you use your competitors' software if you weren't just, like, taking ideas? I don't know. Seems dodgy.
And don't get us wrong, a bit of competition may be good to motivate businesses. But in this case, like you said, Jules, it's just gone a little bit too far, especially now that we find ourselves in an ugly legal battle between the two companies.
Yeah, ugly indeed. So there's a really big timeline of this story, and we'll step you through that timeline throughout the episode. You've got our characters, you've got Dodgy Deel, the bad guys, and Rippling, the victim. So you understand the history and that there's billions of dollars at play here. So let's jump into this lawsuit where Rippling is suing Deel for putting a corporate spy in their environment.
Yeah, so let's go back to the start where this lawsuit begins, which is in June of 2023, when Rippling did what all companies do and hired an employee to work for them. This employee was out of Ireland, and we're going to call him Jack for the sake of the story because throughout the document he is anonymous and it can get a bit confusing, so we're going to call him Jack. And he was hired to manage a team of payroll specialists and supervise payroll-related customer complaints.
Yeah, so he got hired and could therefore, of course, access a lot of internal HR platforms, Slack platform for messaging, Salesforce information, and Rippling's Google Drive information. These are all normal things that Jack needed to do his job, so it feels pretty normal at this stage.
So nothing out of the ordinary happens for about a year as Jack is doing pretty standard things he would for his role, until we get to November 2024, which is when he seemingly spontaneously starts to search the term Deel over and over again 23 times a day. And this brings up documents within Rippling's Slack that were related to any customers that were thinking of ending their contracts with Rippling and going over to dodgy Deel.
Yeah, and I guess to put that into perspective, imagine you were struggling with your phone provider and you call up and you say, listen, my coverage is really bad. I'm not really happy with my internet plan, whatever it might be. I'm going to leave you and head to a different provider if you don't give me a discount or a better deal. So usually that phone provider will come to the party and say, yeah, no worries, I'll give you a discount or an extra perk to make you stay. So in the same way, these were the type of customer notes, I guess, that our spy Jack was allegedly combing through to find. So it's alleged that he was then downloading and sending these documents or bits of information over to dodgy Deel to say, yep, this customer's not having a great time with Rippling, there's some issues, they're threatening to leave or end the contract with Rippling, let's get in there early and offer them a better deal before Rippling can kind of patch the relationship.
And bear in mind, as we mentioned at the top, these contracts for HR software products are often worth hundreds and thousands of dollars, so pinching a customer is a pretty big deal. Pardon the pun. Rather than spending time and money on their own marketing and resources, it seems like dodgy Deel just got Jack, their spy, to do their dirty work, to make it really easy for them to identify who wasn't happy, what can we do, like exactly what can we do to get this customer into our environment and make that cash.
And this went on for months under the radar of our victim Rippling, with Spy Jack searching and sending apparently the information of 6,000 customers during this time, which is a lot of effort and a lot of time for anyone, really. And it seems that Jack really knew that what he was doing was pretty suspicious and dodgy because he was actively trying to avoid detection in a couple of different ways. So the first way was that he was only accessing documents in preview mode to make sure basically that the owners of the channels and documents couldn't see him accessing all of this customer information and issues and problems that they were facing. And then the second one was that he was starting his searches on his personal mobile phone or mobile device, thinking that it would be a little bit more hidden and a little less susceptible to detection, which, spoiler alert, it was not, unfortunately, for our friend Jack. So then once he had found the right documentation, Jack would jump onto his computer, download and send the file. So he's identifying it on his phone first and then going, yep, I know where to go, accessing it on his computer and doing the dirty work there. So this customer theft was going on for months.
Yikes. But it seems dodgy Deel and their internal spy Jack did not stop at customer information because the lawsuit also alleges that Jack was using his access to poach people for Deel. Again, so brazen. Taking the customers and the people just feels like a double stab.
Yeah, pretty crazy if you ask me. And by this point, we've jumped forward about a few months and we're in January 2025. And this is where the lawsuit alleges that the chief operations officer from Deel, someone in a position of leadership, was behind this one. And that's because in January 2025, some dodgy occurrences happened. Let me explain. So the chief operations officer of dodgy Deel messages a Rippling employee on LinkedIn. Remember, they're poaching people now. That leader doesn't actually get a reply from that Rippling employee, which is fine. That's totally fine. A few days later, however, our internal spy at Rippling, Jack, was seen visiting or looking up that individual employee's Slack page, which basically has their contact details. You know, it would have their email. It's basically their little contact card. Then within a few days of that, the Chief Operations Officer of Deel is all of a sudden sending that employee a text message via WhatsApp. So no longer on LinkedIn, but all of a sudden now texting on WhatsApp. Like, how did the Chief Operations Officer get his number in the first place? Kind of weird, but we now know that Jack was the one that probably passed on that information after he looked up that contact's details in Slack.
Okay. So, yeah, we'll definitely put a screenshot of this text message exchange and the WhatsApp exchange on our socials, on Instagram, because it is kind of creepy, and I feel like you can feel the tangible invasiveness when you see the two side by side. So this poor Rippling employee was actually quite freaked out. I mean, very understandingly, because they did not have their phone number on LinkedIn, and this person had just messaged them on LinkedIn and now all of a sudden did have their phone number.
So Rippling actually took this matter really seriously, which is great, and opened a security investigation in February 2025, which was a month after this happened, basically to get to the bottom of the phone number leak. But unfortunately, they did close that once they didn't find any conclusive evidence of a hack or a compromise or anything like that occurring for that employee. Which, I mean, they were probably looking for people on the outside, right? Not necessarily looking for someone on the inside, which is probably expected.
So all of this trawling through customer information, employee information, porting across to Dodgy Deel, you might be wondering, how did it all come crashing down for Jack and Dodgy Deel? Funnily enough, through a reporter tip-off. Because on February 18th, 2025, an investigative reporter at The Information reached out to Rippling about an upcoming article they were writing concerning Dodgy Deel's Russia-related sanctions activity, which, again, they have their name Dodgy for a reason. The reporter said, "Look, Rippling, I found these screenshots. I've come upon them. Someone has given them to me, of your internal chats talking about sanctioned countries. This included things like Russia, Iran, and Syria. Do you care to comment, Rippling, on this dodgy information?" And while Rippling replied, "No, these assertions do not hold water. We have never transmitted a payment to a sanctioned country, including Russia," it did raise alarm bells for Rippling, because they thought, how has this reporter got access to our internal Slack messages? These are only available to Rippling employees. Why would Rippling employees be throwing us under the bus like that? Who would throw us under the bus? It feels like a Dodgy Deel action.
Yeah, so what do you know? Another security investigation was opened up by Rippling surrounding these screenshots to essentially identify who did it. Like, what the heck's going on over here? Rippling's investigators head over to their Slack log files. So think of these as like the fingerprints, which show all of the, employee activity on Slack or whatever computer system you're looking at. And they start searching through these logs to look for keywords mentioned in the reporter's screenshots. So upon review, the investigators learned that a single account with a single Rippling employee, our good friend Jack, was the only person who had searched for these specific, targeted, and kind of unusual keywords that corresponded with the shared Slack messages. So by this stage, there's already a little bit of a clue that maybe this Jack guy is doing something a bit weird or looking for interesting things.
It feels on brand for Dodgy Deel. And while they had the name of the account, they could see it was tied to Jack. Sometimes people's accounts can get stolen, right? So they had to keep going further and get further evidence to prove that this was the account and it was Jack. So they looked at where the IP addresses were coming from to identify if someone had compromised the account. Maybe the IP was coming from China, so it couldn't have been someone from their organization. But unfortunately, it wasn't. It was pinging back to Jack's location in Ireland, which strongly suggested that Jack was performing this spying himself from his own devices and someone was not, in fact, impersonating him.
This is pretty damning evidence, but two more pieces sealed the deal. This is where it might get a little bit more complex, so stay with us. The first of these two pieces of evidence was the word or the words tiny bird. So you might be thinking, what the heck is that? So it was Rippling, because it looked like Jack had searched this phrase or this term, these two words, multiple times, heaps of times. At the time of the investigation, it didn't mean too much to Rippling's investigators either. That is until the article dropped from the reporter who tipped off Rippling in the first place. So the article stated that Tiny Bird was Dodgy Deel's customer, and they made payments to sanctioned Russian banks using the Deel platform, which, as we know, is pretty dodgy, big no-no. Specifically, and we'll quote the lawsuit here, Tiny Bird followed instructions currently hosted on the website of a sanctioned Russian bank that guided companies on how to skirt sanction rules by using Deel.
Gosh, they really sell themselves the name Dodgy Deel. Like, do you see why we just automatically gave them that name? It just kind of rolled off the tongue, because being involved in corporate espionage and a side of Russian sanctions is what I call dodgy. And we will note that Deel did deny these claims, but the point is Jack searched the word Tiny Bird before this article came out, so it does seem obvious that Deel was directing Jack to search for keywords that could also potentially throw dirt on Rippling if they were involved with Tiny Bird in any way. But as Jack discovered, Rippling had nothing to do with Tiny Bird, but made him have everything to do with being an obvious suspect.
Yeah, and by this stage in the timeline, we are in March 2025, and this is where that second piece of evidence comes in. Straight out of a James Bond movie in Ocean's 11, this is the big moment, the major sting that caught Jack red-handed. So let's explain this. Rippling put together a test or trick, or in the security world, we like to call these honeypots. And this honeypot would essentially prove once and for all that Dodgy Deel was deploying a spy, our man Jack, into Rippling and specifically their Slack channels.
Yeah, a honeypot is designed to trick and lure cybercriminals into committing an offense by creating a really juicy target. This target is monitored and then can be observed, studied, and further details can be gathered from investigators, similar to a booby trap. And Rippling was pretty clever in how they did it, so let's walk through the details.
Perfect. So on the evening of March 3rd, 2025, Rippling's general counsel sent an email to 3 individuals. And remember, this is a trick. So they've picked someone called Felipe, who has a few titles, including Dodgy Deel's board chair, their chief financial officer, and general counsel member, as well as being the father of Deel's CEO. So that's a lot of hats that person's wearing and a lot of authority. There's the second person, Spiros, is Deel's head of US legal. And then finally, there's an employment attorney at Deel's outside law firm. So this email was crafted to be a little bit of a heads up to Deel that Rippling was aware of a Slack channel that had been created where ex-Deel employees could share embarrassing information about Deel. So Rippling, the good guy, kind of saying, oh, we found this dodgy information, this is just a heads up. Rippling had attached screenshots of this channel where an employee named Matt Plank was saying things like, oh, just learned a few crazy things on the D-Defectors Slack channel. These 2 things seem like they're pretty illegal and bad if they ever became public, like, ooh, dodgy stuff. But then the rest of the screenshot was redacted for dramatic effect, of course.
Redacting the screenshot is such a good play by Rippling, like a little bit of dramatic effect we love. So I'll also remind our listeners here, this situation from the General Counsel of Rippling is completely made up. From the channel, the name of the employee, it's all fake purely to get their attention that their reputation is about to be damaged.
Yeah. So they sent this email. Deel ignored the email, seemingly. But it then does also seem that they didn't miss the message because our good friend Jack was busy in the search, in the Slack search, looking for D-Defectors in Slack and also searching for Matt Plank, mere hours after this email was sent out.
And again, this channel does not exist. So Jack was the only person accessing it, this booby trap, which indicated to Rippling that one of the 3 biggest senior leaders within Dodgy Deel was in on directing this spy on where to go, performing dirty work, which is crazy. Like, surely the senior leaders should know better. But who am I to judge?
Absolute mic drop of a moment, because It's kind of hook, line, and sinker, moth to the flame, like ant to the honey pot. It's like it actually worked so perfectly. Between Tiny Bird and this, they'd got him with this evidence in hand. Rippling did a major investigation on Jack and found out all of that customer information was being stolen, the employee data that was being leaked, and this was all the stuff that we've mentioned previously. So we found out all of this because they ran this investigation. But now the chase is on because you've got a confirmed insider threat on your hands and you need to catch him.
Dang. But how do they do that? Because there was some concern if they confront Jack now without a warrant, he can just delete everything on his device, walk away, actually go and tell Deel, heads up, they're onto us, delete everything on your computer, which would result in all of this effort for nothing. So before they did anything, Rippling decided to go to the High Court in Ireland and obtain a warrant to seize and inspect Jack's phone and computer, because this would allow them to take an image of the phone and analyze it log for log to get more evidence and information to help this lawsuit go through. But once this warrant was obtained, this is where the plan went down the drain, literally, it seems.
Yeah, when Jack was served the warrant, he was apparently pretty panicked and told the solicitor that his phone was in another bag and that he had to go and retrieve it. Apparently, he looked so nervous that the solicitor had to remind Jack that if he was lying about the whereabouts of this phone, he was breaching a court order, which is a pretty serious offence. But nonetheless, off they went down the office stairs to retrieve this alternate bag. Lo and behold, it seems that the bag only held a notebook, and the solicitor was getting more and more suspicious that this mobile was in fact on Jack's person and not in any bag or anywhere else.
Yeah, the misdirection was never going to work, especially when someone is patiently waiting, tapping their foot. The solicitor was adamant that they were walking away with that phone. But it seems Jack had other plans. He knew the jig was up. He literally ran to the bathroom, locked the door behind him, and refused to come out. It's alleged that the solicitor heard Jack doing something on his phone, then also heard Jack flush the toilet, suggesting he had just flushed the phone down the toilet rather than providing it back to the solicitor for analysis.
How wild, like quite literally flushing away the evidence. Although the lawsuit does say that the building office pipes were checked and inspected, but there was no mobile devices, it feels so sus. So weird.
So obviously Jack had to come out of the bathroom at some point, and the solicitor said, and I quote from the lawsuit, "Take another step forward rather than handing over the phone immediately would be an additional breach of the order. So you've already done one breach, let's not make it two, buddy." To which Jack replied, "I'm willing to take that risk," and stormed out of the office and fled the scene.
It's so dramatic! How's that for a Hollywood ending, folks? The racing around the office, the flushing the evidence down the toilet, inspection of the pipes, the sassy ending. Considering how boring HR software can be, this story has it all.
So where are they now, Jules?
Well, this lawsuit was filed on the 17th of March 2025, so pretty recent, and a few things have come up since, and it doesn't look like this feud or case will be solved anytime soon.
Yeah, first up, probably most interestingly, is the unmasking of our spy, Jack, because as we said at the top, the lawsuit does not name who the spy actually is or was throughout the document. So when this all came out in March, everyone was wondering who has done it. Like, who is Jack? But we didn't have to wait for long because the identity of Jack was revealed when Rippling released an affidavit in April, so a month later, that stated a man named Keith O'Brien had admitted to being Deel's spy and had done a 180 and was now willing to testify against Dodgy Deel.
Swapping sides from this guy as well, like from Dodgy Deel, now he's over to Rippling, the victims you were actually just stealing from for the last, bunch of time.
Wild. So once this dropped, journalists all over the world, in the cyber world maybe, were reading through it. Articles were being pumped out. One in particular from TechCrunch said, "The affidavit of a Rippling employee caught spying for Deel reads like a movie." And if you thought the lawsuit was good, this affidavit is great because we now get Jack, or Keith's, side of the story. And it covers a couple of questions I had reading the lawsuit. The first being, how did Keith even get involved in this in the first place? Well, according to the affidavit, it is true that Keith started working for Rippling in June of 2023. And interestingly, he applied for a job at Deel in 2024. But he didn't get the job, which poor Keith, Jack, we're going to call him Keith from now on. But he did express to Deel once he got let down that he was looking to quit Rippling and start his own HR software business, which seems to be the thing in San Francisco. And Keith asked Deel if they wanted to be in on it. But dodgy Deel said, no thanks, we're already making $12 billion probably. And Keith alleges that in this moment, that is when the Deel founder and his father, the CFO, and the board and all those other titles that Jules mentioned earlier, suggested that instead of quitting Rippling and starting your own business, why don't you be a spy for us at Deel?
Spicy indeed. And when Keith agreed, the affidavit says within hours, Keith was on a WhatsApp call with Alex, the Deel's CEO, and his dad, the CFO. Communications were immediately moved to Telegram and messages set to auto-delete in 24 hours.
Gosh, there it is. The straight-up admission from Keith, the spy. Another question, Jules, I think it answers is how much was Deel paying this guy to perform this work?
You'd really hope it's a lot, right?
Right. So he testified that Deel offered to pay him €5,000 per month and later performed transactions in crypto. He also testified that he was, in fact, sharing information about hundreds of companies per day, which the logs reflect, whenever Deel requested them. Keith also stated he did his search over Slack, Google Drive, and turned over pretty much whatever was asked for.
Yeah, it sounded like it got pretty intense as well. Keith says that he sometimes sent up to 6 screen recordings a day and would get messages from Deel's CEO if, he hadn't been heard from for a couple of hours or hadn't checked in. Like, just thinking about it quietly for a moment, it's pretty crazy. This is a new concept being generated here for a data mule, potentially. Is this the new drug mule? I'm not sure. But you're risking an awful lot for a bit of cash. And to be honest, not that much cash, seemingly.
Yeah, definitely one for companies to look out for. The data mule might be inside your walls. Also interesting that Keith admitted to the big fish. He testified that he was instructed to search the D defectors channel and Matt Planck. And apparently shortly after he did so, they told him not to because they thought it might be a trap. It felt too good to be true. And I mean, look where we are. Seems a little too late. But they were right.
Yeah, imagine that moment of realization. Like, caught red-handed. Too late. Jack's such a good spy, he already searched for it. Drat. So, what was the aftermath for Keith in this instance? So there was kind of one more question that we had on our mind, which was what happened in that toilet stall. Did he or did he not flush his phone down the toilet? The answer is surprisingly no. Apparently, he testified that he turned over his laptop, sure, but he hid his phone and essentially escaped to the bathroom where he wiped it of all the evidence, so he factory reset it, and he pretended to flush it down the toilet, which is what that solicitor would have heard in that instance. So he said that after he went home, he, and I quote, smashed my old phone with an axe and put it down the drain at my mother-in-law's house. On advice from people he believed to represent Deel, he testified. So, again, dramatic ending. He just wants to be a Hollywood actor here. Crazy. Like, the axe seems unnecessary.
Right? It's so, not my, first thing of choice. And it's so heavy. Get a hammer. Anyway, apparently Keith, Angry Axe Keith, was directed to buy a burner phone and communicate with Deel's lawyers on Telegram with that burner phone. They allegedly offered to relocate Keith to Dubai because of the extradition policies there. Keith also testifies that Deel prompted him in an attempt to flip the narrative again, which is what they seem to love to do, to suggest again that Rippling was facilitating Russian payments and he was only being harassed because he was a whistleblower.
But it seems this is where Keith's moral compass got the best of him. The affidavit states that friends and family were encouraging him to tell the truth. And this is when Keith decides to cooperate. So he turns over the burner phone, he surrenders his devices to Rippling's team, and begins cooperating with an investigation that names Deel executives directly.
And that's that. The court case of Rippling vs. Deel is set to play out in September, so we're still in the throes of this legal battle. Stay tuned to see how this works out. Obviously, Deel is denying the claims. They've actually sued Rippling for defamation. And Rippling have actually gone and updated the court case to say they allege that Deel also have been spying on an additional 4 competitors. So this case is getting spicier, if anything. We'll keep you updated when we can.
Whew, what a whirlwind. We told you it was a little bit of a doozy, and I really think this case will be a way of the future. And I guess here at GTC, we love to finish with some lessons learned, and I'd say this case shows a couple of things. So 1, your workplace can log a lot of actions and searches and track a lot of activity that happens on your device. 2, if you have workers or teams or, different employees in your company, restrict their access to only information that they actually need access to. And 3, probably don't pay sanctioned customers in Russia. Just hot tip.
It can get you in hot water. Don't search Tiny Bird in your workplace. But that's it from us. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, don't forget you can keep the conversation going over in our Facebook group, Girls Talk Cyber, to share your cyber stories with us and each other. Or head over to our Instagram, Girls Talk Cyber, over there as well, to keep an eye out for any updates coming through for this case or anything from us in the future. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.